Kale floated through the wreckage of the orbital station like a reluctant dancer at a party he hadn't RSVP'd to. The air was thick with scorched metal and the faint tang of ozone, a scent that always made him sneeze inappropriately during life-or-death situations. He muttered something about how zero gravity was the universe's cruelest joke as a loose panel drifted past him like a metallic ghost. Somewhere deep in the corridor, a faint, high-pitched cry cut through the hum of failing machinery. Kale's first thought was that it was either a trapped civilian or, worse, a genetically modified hamster the size of a bread box. Either way, it wasn't supposed to be making that sound. He navigated through the debris, hopping awkwardly between jagged pieces of metal that had once been walls and floors. A flickering light panel buzzed above him, casting long, jittering shadows that made the corridors feel like they were alive. When he rounded a corner, he saw her, a young alien girl tangled in the twisted wreckage of a collapsed passageway. Her ears were long, tapering elegantly like sculpted ivory, and twitched with nervous energy. She looked almost human otherwise, except for her green-tinged skin that shimmered faintly under the strobe of emergency lights, and her eyes, large, luminescent, and terrified. Hey," Kale said, trying to sound casual while suspending himself on a hanging cable to avoid stepping on a floating shard of glass. You're stuck, right?" Her eyes narrowed, suspicious and sharp. "No kidding," she hissed, though her voice had a musical lilt that made Kale think she might hum a tune just by speaking. "Well, I mean, I'm not judging," Kale said, carefully extending a hand. "Just looks like someone should help you. That someone being me, obviously. No offense, but you're not exactly unstuck." A faint twitch at the corner of her mouth suggested the beginning of a smile, though her eyes were still wary. Kale attempted to extricate her from the debris, but in classic Kale fashion, he misjudged his momentum, swung too far, and collided with the wall, sending himself tumbling backward. "Okay, slightly more help than planned," he admitted mid-roll. The girl, Lyria, giggled softly despite the situation, the sound a strange melody in the metallic ruin. "Careful," she said, "or you'll become another piece of floating wreckage." "Noted," he said, using his foot to stabilize a drifting panel, "though I feel like that would make a decent story for my memoirs. Chapter 1. How I Became Space Debris and Also Saved a Girl." She frowned at him, but the tension between them began to ease. Kale reached out again, and this time with careful coordination that required more patience than he usually allowed himself, he managed to pull her free. She landed on a firm patch of metal floor, brushing herself off, her long ears twitching in every direction like she was scanning for threats. You're not like the others," she said cautiously, her voice a whisper. "You didn't shoot first." Kale raised an eyebrow. "Well, most of the time, shooting first doesn't solve things. Mostly it just makes things messier, and also it gets you sued in 3 different star systems." He glanced around the corridor. "So, safe to say the whole comm rescue thing went better than expected." Lyria tilted her head, studying him. "Why are you helping me?" "Because," he said with mock solemnity, "my mother raised me right. Also, I like to think of myself as a professional in heroic rescue operations. Pretty niche skill set, but it's paying off right now." A flicker of amusement passed over her face. "Professional heroic." "Yes, exactly. Next week. Galactic diplomacy. Don't tell anyone I'm aiming for a promotion." He grinned, and for a brief moment, Lyria's shoulders relaxed, the tension in her body softening. Kale led her carefully through the corridors, improvising steps around floating debris and broken conduit. Occasionally, they would drift side to side, bumping lightly into walls and each other, and Kale would apologize with exaggerated gestures. "Third time I've hit a wall today. And yes, it's getting embarrassing even by my standards." Lyria laughed, and the sound echoed through the hollowed station like a reminder that even here, danger didn't have to erase joy. As they reached a junction, Kale paused, peering down a dimly lit shaft where smoke curled like lazy serpents. Okay, he said, fun fact about me, I have a terrible sense of direction, and also a not-so-great sense of survival. But together, we might just make it out alive, or at least in one piece. Possibly. Lyria tilted her head again, studying his confident yet clumsy posture. You're strange, she said softly. Kale grinned. You have no idea, but trust me, strange can be very useful. Especially when the universe is trying to kill you in 12 different ways simultaneously. A sudden groan of shifting metal made them both pause. A section of the ceiling above them began to collapse, dust and debris falling like a miniature meteor shower. Kale grabbed her hand without thinking, pulling her into a narrow alcove. They huddled together, floating precariously above the jagged floor. You really are heroic, Lyria said quietly, her ears flattening slightly as a sign of stress. Kale gave a mock bow, almost losing balance in zero gravity. I told you, heroic, but also slightly clumsy, package deal. For a moment the chaos around them faded, and Kale noticed the way the light from the damaged station glinted across her hair, her ears, the subtle shimmer of her skin. She looked fragile and fierce all at once, a creature of this strange world that somehow felt entirely alive. When the danger passed, Kale tugged her to her feet, or rather, floated her upright, and together they moved deeper into the station. Somewhere down the corridor, a small panel clattered to the floor. Kale scooped it up. I'm keeping this, he said with a grin. Souvenir of the day I saved a very impressive alien girl without losing any limbs. Mostly. Lyria laughed again, longer this time, her fear easing into something resembling trust. And though Kale didn't know it yet, that simple act, saving her from what should have been certain death, was about to change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Kale and Lyria drifted through the twisting corridors of the abandoned station like two mismatched comets caught in each other's orbit. Every so often, a panel would scrape past them, sending sparks into the air like miniature fireworks. Kale jabbed at one of the loose conduits with a gloved hand. You know, he said, I read once that space stations are supposed to be orderly and safe. I think someone lied to me, or maybe it was the brochure. Lyria tilted her head, ears twitching. I didn't think humans found humor in danger. Ah, Kale said with mock solemnity, you underestimate the sheer audacity of my species. Humor is our armor. Or maybe it's just our way of screaming quietly into the void. Either works. They reached a junction where the corridor split into two paths. One led to a service elevator that hadn't moved in decades, the other to a maintenance shaft that smelled faintly of burnt circuitry and regret. Lyria's eyes flicked toward the elevator. We could try that. Kale shook his head. Elevators are basically vertical coffins with mood swings. I vote for the shaft. It's narrower, but at least it doesn't groan like it's complaining about life choices. She raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You humans are curious. Curious is another word for surviving with style, Kale said, floating sideways into the shaft. Follow me. The shaft was a tight squeeze, but Lyria adapted quickly, her long ears brushing against the sides as she glided past obstacles. Kale had to laugh when she used one of the dangling wires to swing herself forward like a gymnast. Okay, I see it now, he admitted. You might be better at this than me, slightly annoying actually. Better? She asked, smirking. I've had centuries of training in navigating tight, dangerous places. What's your excuse? Kale made a dramatic shrug, pure talent and the occasional lucky stumble. As they progressed, faint lights flickered along the walls, revealing signs of previous inhabitants. Graffiti in an alien script, scorch marks from firefights, and a lone helmet floating lazily in a corner like a forgotten pet. Kale kicked it aside gently. Ah yes, nothing says welcome like decades of neglect and death. Lyria let out a soft laugh. You're strange, human. I prefer charmingly unpredictable, Kale replied, flipping over a protruding beam. But strange works too, more marketable. They reached an intersection where the sound of mechanical whirring and faint footsteps warned them that they were not alone. Raiders, human mercenaries who dealt in alien tech, had tracked Lyria here. Kale peered around a corner and whispered, "So, fun fact, I have no plan, but I do have improvised brilliance. Mostly improvisation, though, maybe 80%. Lyria's ears flattened slightly. "And the other 20. "Hope," Kale said, grinning. "Pure, untested hope." The raiders turned the corner, weapons glowing with a faint blue pulse. Kale seized a loose panel and tossed it, hitting one of their suits and setting off a minor chain reaction that sent sparks flying. Ta-da, distraction, optional effectiveness. Lyria didn't hesitate. She darted forward, using a patch of low gravity to propel herself like a comet, snatching a data chip from the nearest raider's belt. The human's mouth fell open. "You're efficient and terrifying." "Thank you," she said, spinning elegantly midair. "I try." Kale grabbed her hand and tugged her behind a bulkhead, both of them pressing themselves into the shadow. The raiders passed, grumbling about missing prey. One of them muttered, "Next time I'm bringing my grandmother." Kale couldn't help it. He whispered, "Grandma's probably a better threat than we are, just saying." Lyria giggled, the sound echoing softly against the metallic walls. Once the immediate danger had passed, Kale led her down a spiraling maintenance conduit that ended in an airlock. The lock panel was cracked, the readouts flickering, but Kale waved his hand at it like a magician revealing a trick. "Step 1, science. Step 2, hope. Step 3, probably some screaming. Step 4, success or minor explosions, optional." Lyria shook her head, but the amusement in her eyes betrayed her skepticism. "Humans really have a strange way of thinking," she said. "Strange is relative," Kale replied, sliding the door open. A rush of cold, vacuum-scented air hit them, followed by a view of the stars glittering like shattered diamonds. He gestured theatrically. "Behold, freedom, also mildly life-threatening exposure, but let's focus on the freedom part." They floated out into the open, using their momentum to navigate a field of broken solar arrays and drifting debris. Kale muttered about needing better coordination, but Lyria's laughter was infectious, buoying him despite the chaos. At one point, a chunk of satellite debris hurtled toward them. Kale spun, grabbed Lyria, and flipped them both out of the way, landing in a tangled heap on a derelict observation platform. "Okay," he panted. "That was dramatic. Points for style." "You have flair," she admitted, dusting herself off. "And bad luck." "Exactly," Kale said, raising an imaginary banner. "Heroism and chaos, two sides of the same coin. I take both." They moved onward, weaving between drifting machinery, Lyria pointing out shortcuts and hidden channels only a native of her kind could know. Kale tried to match her agility, occasionally flubbing spectacularly, and she laughed every time, the sound strangely grounding. By the time they reached a partially intact shuttle bay, Kale was covered in dust, bruised in places he didn't want to name, and smiling despite it all. Lyria floated beside him, her long ears twitching in amusement. "You're reckless." "And yet," he said, extending a hand toward her, "we made it, barely, but that's teamwork, right?" She hesitated, then took his hand. "Teamwork," she agreed. As they prepared the shuttle for departure, a faint alarm echoed through the station, signaling that the raiders had realized their target was gone. Kale glanced at her with mock severity, ready for the next part of the adventure. She gave a small smile, determination shining in her eyes. "Always." And with that, the shuttle's engine sputtered to life, casting a warm glow across the two unlikely companions as they launched into the void, leaving behind the chaos of the station, but not the promise of what was to come. The shuttle shuddered as it broke through the final debris field, the stars stretching into lines of light, as if the universe itself was congratulating them on surviving. Kale gripped the console, muttering about how space traffic control clearly hates me, while Lyria floated beside him, her ears twitching in rhythm with the soft hum of the engines. "You know," she said, voice calm despite the tension, "for a human, you're remarkably persistent." Kale glanced at her with mock offense. "Remarkable? I'm heroic. Persistent is just a side effect." He wiggled his eyebrows. Also slightly reckless, but hey, that's charm. Lyria rolled her eyes, though the faint smile tugging at her lips betrayed amusement. We'll see how heroic you feel once we dock. The shuttle touched down in Lyria's enclave, a city suspended in orbit among crystalline nebulae that refracted the light like liquid gemstones. The sight made Kale stumble backward, forgetting his heroics for a moment as he gawked at the glittering towers. I think I need a manual for this place, preferably in 12 languages. Also gravity if anyone has a spare. Lyria laughed, drifting ahead to lead him through corridors lined with alien symbols and softly glowing flora suspended in anti-gravity pods. As they neared the central plaza, a group of elders appeared, their long ears and luminous eyes reflecting suspicion and curiosity in equal measure. Kale straightened, puffed out his chest as best as zero gravity allowed, and said, "Greetings, esteemed citizens. I come in peace mostly, and possibly for a medal, or at least a handshake." One of the elders stepped forward, a tall figure whose ears extended elegantly backward, their eyes assessing Kale with careful intensity. "You are human," they said, voice low, resonant, "and you have brought her back." Kale nodded vigorously. "That's the headline, yes. The details involve daring maneuvers, some mild peril, and, if I may say so, impeccable timing on my part." Lyria shot him a look that suggested she was about to reprimand him for exaggeration, but instead she simply said, "He is telling the truth mostly." The elders murmured among themselves, clearly torn between distrust of humans and admiration for Kale's efforts. One of them finally spoke. "You have changed the fate of our people, human, not merely by saving her but by showing courage where others would hesitate." Kale bowed, nearly tipping over in zero gravity. "Courage and occasional improvisation, yes, I recommend both." Just then, the faint rumble of engines announced the raiders' arrival. Kale glanced at Lyria, who tilted her head and flicked her ears toward the approaching threat. "I was wondering when they'd remember us," she said. Kale grinned, despite the rising tension. "Well, I was hoping for a quiet arrival, but clearly the universe prefers drama. Shall we remind them why heroism matters?" The battle that followed was a dizzying dance of zero-gravity maneuvers and improvisation. Kale coordinated with the Enclave's defenders, tossing improvised shock grenades and manipulating the environment to create barriers of floating debris. Lyria moved with fluid precision, using her knowledge of hidden channels and structural weak points to outmaneuver the raiders. At one point, Kale floated backward into a control panel, accidentally triggering a flood of holographic projections that dazzled and disoriented the attackers. "Unintentional genius," he shouted. By the end, the raiders were repelled, some scrambling for escape pods, others surrendering entirely. The Enclave's citizens cheered, their voices mingling with the hum of the nebula-lit city. Kale slumped against a support beam, breathing hard, and said, "I think we did it. Mostly alive. Definitely dramatic." Lyria drifted beside him, brushing a strand of her hair from her face. "You didn't just save me," she said quietly. "You helped save everyone here. And you've changed too." Kale blinked. "Changed?" "Yes," she said, her ears flicking thoughtfully. "You've gone from a soldier who merely survives to someone who inspires trust, who leads even if awkwardly, and who cares beyond his own safety." He smiled a little sheepishly. I guess I had a good teacher." She tilted her head, smiling softly. "Perhaps, and I think you learned quickly." The two of them floated toward a high terrace overlooking the city. The nebulae stretched endlessly, and the stars seemed to shimmer brighter than before. Kale leaned against the rail, still catching his breath, and said, "You know, I thought saving you would be just another mission. I never expected," he paused, glancing at her, "to feel like this, or to find a place where I actually belong. Well, sort of belong. Not that I'd move in permanently. Gravity is overrated anyway." Lyria laughed, the sound carrying softly into the night. "Sort of belong is enough." Kale nodded, watching the city's lights pulse softly in harmony with the nebulae. "Yeah, enough." They remained there for a long while, sharing silence and laughter in equal measure, the universe stretching infinitely beyond them. But for the first time, it felt manageable. Cale's journey had begun as a mission to rescue a single girl, but it had transformed him, and through him, the fate of an entire people. They were both changed, bonded by trust, courage, and an improbable friendship that spanned species and stars. The stars flickered in the distance, a quiet